The transport ship landed with a heavy thud on the concrete pad. Jake Morrison pressed his face against the small window and saw Earth for the first time in 3 years. The sky was blue, not the black void he had grown used to. White clouds drifted slowly across the horizon. Everything looked so peaceful. Jake was 17 years old now. When he left Earth, he was only 14. The Terran Defense Force needed every able body they could get. The war against the Zephyrians was going badly. Earth was losing. So they took children who could hold a rifle and sent them to fight among the stars. The ship's doors opened with a hiss. Jake picked up his small bag and walked down the ramp. His legs felt strange on solid ground. He had spent so long in space that Earth's gravity felt heavy and wrong. Each step required effort. A crowd waited for him at the landing pad. People held signs with his name. Others waved small Earth flags. Someone had put up a banner that read, "Welcome home, hero." Jake stared at the banner and felt nothing. He did not feel like a hero. Heroes were supposed to feel good about what they did. "Jake, over here." He turned and saw his parents pushing through the crowd. His mother Helen looked older. Her hair had more gray in it. His father Robert had gained weight and wore glasses now. Behind them came his sister Katie. She was 15 now, almost as tall as their mother. Helen reached him first. She threw her arms around him and started crying. Jake stood still and let her hug him. He could not remember the last time someone had hugged him. In the military, they did not hug. They saluted or they died. "My baby," Helen whispered. "You're so thin." Jake looked down at himself. The military uniform hung loose on his frame. He had grown taller but not wider. 3 years of military rations and combat stress had burned away any softness he once had. Robert shook his hand firmly. "Welcome home, son. We're proud of you." Katie hung back, unsure. The brother who had left was a kid who liked video games and building models. The person who came back had scars on his hands and a way of looking at everything like it might explode. Mayor Linda Garcia pushed through the crowd with a microphone. She was a short woman with a big smile and a loud voice. Behind her came reporters with cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "let's give a warm Cedar Falls welcome to our local hero, Jake Morrison." The crowd cheered. Jake winced at the noise. Too many people making too much sound. His hand moved toward his hip where his sidearm used to be, but there was no weapon there. He was home now. He was safe. The reporters pressed forward with their cameras and questions. "Jake, how does it feel to be home? What was the worst battle you fought? Do you have any regrets about joining so young?" Jake looked at the cameras and microphones pointed at his face. He had learned to speak clearly when giving reports to his commanding officers, but these questions felt different. They wanted him to perform emotion he did not feel. "It feels good to be back," he said. His voice sounded flat and empty. The reporter pressed on. "Can you tell us about your service? We heard you were at the Battle of Kepler Station." Jake's jaw tightened. Kepler Station was where Carlos Mendez died. Carlos was 20 years old and had 2 little sisters back on Earth. A Zephyrian plasma grenade had gone off too close. Jake had held Carlos as he died, trying to keep his blood from floating away in zero gravity. "I served where they needed me," Jake said. The reporter sensed a story. "Were you ever scared?" Jake looked at her for a long moment. Scared was what you felt when you had time to think. In combat, there was no time for scared. There was only action and reaction. Do your job or die. Keep your squad alive or fail. Fear was a luxury he could not afford. "We should get him home," Robert said, stepping between Jake and the reporters. "He's had a long trip." The crowd began to break up, but people kept coming over to shake Jake's hand or pat his shoulder. An old man with a Vietnam War veteran cap nodded at him. A young mother pushed her small son forward to meet him. The boy could not have been more than 5 years old. "Tell the nice soldier thank you," the mother said. The boy looked up at Jake with wide eyes. "Thank you for keeping us safe." Jake stared down at the child. This boy had never seen a plasma blast light up the night. He had never watched friends die in the cold emptiness of space. He had never been forced to make choices that would haunt him forever. "You're welcome," Jake said quietly. The family drove home through streets Jake remembered, but that felt strange. Now nothing had changed, but everything looked different through his eyes. The houses seemed fragile. The people walking on sidewalks looked soft and unaware. They did not scan rooftops for snipers or check shadows for threats. At home, Helen had prepared his favorite meal from before he left. Meatloaf with mashed potatoes and green beans. Jake sat at the dinner table where he used to do homework. His old chair felt too small. "So tell us everything," Helen said, serving him a large portion. "What was it like out there?" Jake looked at the food on his plate. It was real food, not the protein bars and nutrient paste he had eaten for 3 years. But his stomach felt tight. At dinner in the barracks, you ate fast and stayed alert. Here, he was supposed to relax and talk. "It was different," he said. Katie leaned forward. "Did you really fight aliens? What did they look like?" Jake thought about the Zephyrian soldier he had killed in hand-to-hand combat on Europa base. Alien had been young too, probably not much older than Jake. Its large eyes had looked surprised when Jake's knife found its heart. "They looked like people," he said, "just different." The conversation died. His family exchanged glances. They wanted stories of adventure and heroism. Jake had stories of survival and loss. The two things did not match. That night, Jake lay in his old bed and stared at the ceiling. Someone had left his room exactly as it was when he left. Posters of sports cars and movie stars still hung on the walls. Model airplanes sat on shelves, gathering dust. Glow-in-the-dark stars were stuck to the ceiling in patterns that were supposed to look like real constellations. Jake had seen real stars. He had seen them from the bridge of a warship as it jumped through hyperspace. He had seen them explode when enemy fire hit fuel depots. He had seen the light of distant suns reflect off the hull of ships full of dead friends. The fake stars on his ceiling looked like toys. Outside his window, Cedar Falls was quiet and peaceful. No sirens, no explosions, no emergency calls over the communication system. Just the sound of wind in the trees and a dog barking somewhere in the distance. Jake closed his eyes and tried to sleep. But every time he started to drift off, he heard the sound of battle alarms in his head. His body stayed tense, ready to jump up and grab his gear. But there was no gear to grab. There was no battle to fight. He was home, but he did not feel safe. He was surrounded by family, but he felt alone. The war was over, but it still raged inside his head. Peace, Jake realized, felt worse than war. 2 weeks after returning home, Jake walked through the doors of Cedar Falls High School. Students filled the hallways, talking and laughing between classes. Their voices echoed off the walls in a way that made Jake's shoulders tense. Too many people in too small a space. Mrs. Patricia Wells, the guidance counselor, met him at the front office. She was a kind woman in her 50s with gray hair and gentle eyes. She had worked with military families before, but never with someone as young as Jake. "We're so glad to have you back," she said, handing him a class schedule. "I've arranged for you to take senior-level courses. You can graduate with your original class in the spring." Jake looked at the paper. English literature, chemistry, government, history, mathematics. These subjects felt strange after 3 years of tactical training and combat operations. His first class was English with Mrs. Sandra Kim. She was reading from a book about a character who was sad because his girlfriend left him. The other students took notes and discussed the character's feelings. Jake sat in the back row and watched the door. "Jake," Mrs. Kim said, Would you like to share your thoughts on the protagonist's emotional journey? Jake looked at her blankly. The character in the book was upset because someone broke up with him. Jake had watched his best friend Marcus Johnson die when their transport ship was hit by enemy fire. Marcus was 18 and had just gotten engaged to a girl back on Earth. He should get over it, Jake said. The class turned to stare at him. A girl named Lucy Martinez frowned. But he really loved her. It's devastating when someone you care about leaves. Jake thought about all the people he had cared about who had left, not by choice, but because they were dead. He did not understand why fictional heartbreak was supposed to matter. At least she's still alive, he said. The room went quiet. Mrs. Kim cleared her throat and moved on to the next part of the lesson. At lunch, Jake sat alone at a corner table. The cafeteria was loud and crowded. Students complained about homework and tests. They talked about who was dating who and what they planned to do on the weekend. Jake ate his sandwich and listened to conversations that felt like they were happening in a different language. Danny Cooper, his old friend from before the war, approached with his lunch tray. Danny was tall and skinny with brown hair and braces. He played on the school basketball team and was dating a girl named Emma Walsh. "Hey Jake," Danny said, sitting down. "How's your first day going?" "Fine," Jake replied. Danny tried to make conversation. "So Emma's having a party this Saturday. You should come. It'll be fun, just like old times." Jake remembered the parties they used to have before he left. They would play video games and eat pizza and talk about stupid things. It seemed like a lifetime ago. "Maybe," Jake said, but he knew he would not go. In history class, Mr. Gregory Stone asked Jake to stay after the lesson ended. Mr. Stone was a young teacher who had studied military history in college. He thought having a real veteran in his class would be educational. "Jake," he said, "I was wondering if you'd be willing to give a presentation about your experiences. The students would love to hear from someone who was actually there." Jake did not want to talk about the war, but he understood that refusing might cause problems. What kind of presentation? Just tell them what it was like. Help them understand what really happened out there. The next week, Jake stood in front of his history class. 30 students looked at him expectantly. They wanted stories of adventure and heroism. Jake decided to tell them the truth instead. The Battle of Proxima Station lasted 4 days, he began. "We were trying to retake a communications hub from Zephyrian forces. My squad leader was Carlos Mendez. He was 20 years old and had a daughter he'd never met." Jake spoke in the same flat tone he used for military reports. He described the tactical situation and the enemy positions. He explained how they had to fight through 3 levels of the station while under heavy fire. On the 3rd day, we encountered a group of Zephyrian civilians who were trapped in the lower levels. They were just families trying to hide. Carlos ordered us to escort them to safety instead of continuing our mission. The students listened in complete silence. This was not the kind of war story they expected. A Zephyrian patrol found us in the evacuation corridor. Carlos put himself between the enemy and the civilians. He held them off long enough for everyone else to reach the escape pods. The last thing he said was to tell his daughter that Daddy tried to come home. When Jake finished, no one spoke. Several students looked pale. A girl in the front row had tears in her eyes. Mr. Stone cleared his throat nervously. "Thank you, Jake. That was very informative." After that, students treated Jake differently. They whispered when he walked by. Some looked at him with fear, others with pity. No one seemed to know what to say to him. Amy Rodriguez was different. She was a quiet girl with dark hair who worked on the school newspaper. She approached Jake after his presentation. "That must have been hard," she said. "Losing someone you cared about." Jake looked at her carefully. Most people wanted to hear about the exciting parts of war. Amy seemed to understand that war was mostly about loss, Carlos was a good soldier, Jake said. He sounds like he was a good person, too, Jake nodded. Carlos had been both. That was what made his death so hard to accept. Amy started sitting with Jake at lunch. She did not try to fill the silence with empty chatter. Sometimes she asked questions about what life was like in space or how military ships worked. Her questions were thoughtful, not sensational. One day she asked, "Do you miss it? Being out there?" Jake thought about the question. He missed the simplicity of military life. Every day had a clear purpose. Every order had a clear objective. Here at school, everything felt pointless and confusing. Sometimes, he admitted. What do you miss most? Knowing what I was supposed to do. Amy nodded like she understood. It must be hard not having that anymore. Jake's parents arranged for him to see Dr. Benjamin Cole, a therapist who worked with veterans. Dr. Cole had served in the Europa conflict 20 years earlier. He was a calm man with gray hair and patient eyes. "How are you adjusting to civilian life?" Dr. Cole asked during their first session. "Fine," Jake said automatically. Dr. Cole smiled. "That's what I used to say too. It's okay to admit that it's difficult." Jake looked out the office window. He could see the school parking lot where students were getting into cars and driving home to families who had never seen war. "They don't understand," Jake said finally. "No, they don't. And that's not their fault, but it's not yours either." Jake thought about Carlos and Marcus and all the others who would never come home. He thought about the Zephyrian families he had helped save and the Zephyrian soldiers he had killed. He thought about choices he had made that no 17-year-old should have to make. How do I fit in with people who've never had to choose between saving strangers and completing a mission? Jake asked. Dr. Cole leaned forward. "Maybe the question isn't how to fit in. Maybe it's how to find your place in a world that needs what you've learned, even if they don't understand it yet." Jake left the session with more questions than answers. But for the first time since coming home, he felt like someone understood that coming back from war was harder than fighting it. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in November. Jake sat at the dinner table with his family, eating his mother's pot roast. The television was on in the background, playing the evening news. His father, Robert, was talking about his day at the insurance office when the news anchor mentioned military spending. "The Senate approved another increase in defense spending today," the anchor said. "Critics argue that the military-industrial complex is profiting from unnecessary weapons programs." Robert shook his head and chuckled. "Well, at least somebody's getting rich off all this. The war might be over, but the money keeps flowing to those defense contractors." Jake's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully on his plate. "What did you say?" Robert looked confused. "I just said the defense companies are making good money. You know how it is, son. They sell weapons to the government, whether we need them or not." Something cold and hard formed in Jake's chest. He looked at his father, who had never held a rifle in combat, who had never watched friends die because they did not have enough ammunition or proper equipment. "Those weapons saved my life," Jake said quietly. "Well, sure, but the plasma rifle that kept me alive on Europa Station. The body armor that stopped shrapnel from tearing through my chest. The medical supplies that kept Marcus alive for 3 extra hours while we waited for evacuation." Jake's voice was getting louder. "You think those companies made them for fun?" Helen reached across the table. "Jake, honey, your father didn't mean." "No." Jake stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He meant exactly what he said. "You all think war is some kind of game where people get rich and soldiers get medals. You have no idea what it costs." Robert's face turned red. "Now wait just a minute. I support our troops. I support you." "You support the idea of me," Jake said. "You like having a war hero son to brag about. But you don't want to know what I had to do to become one." Katie started crying. She was only 15 and had never seen her brother like this. Helen put her arm around her daughter while staring at Jake with wide, frightened eyes. I held Carlos while he bled out in zero gravity, Jake continued. I watched Marcus burn alive in a damaged fighter cockpit. I killed a Zephyrian kid who was probably younger than Katie. And you think the people who made the weapons that kept me alive are the problem? Jake, please, Helen started. No, you wanted your hero son back. Well, here I am. This is what heroes look like. We're the ones who do the things you're too scared to think about, so you can sit here and complain about defense spending. Jake walked out of the dining room, leaving his family in shocked silence. He went to his room and slammed the door. Outside, he could hear his mother crying and his father's angry voice. The next day at school, Jake's anger had not cooled. During lunch, he saw a group of students at a table with signs that read, "No more war" and "Peace not profit." They were organizing a protest against military recruitment on campus. One of them, a boy named Tyler Brooks, was talking loudly about how the military targeted poor kids and minorities. They send children to fight their wars, he said. It's basically child abuse. Jake walked over to their table. What did you say? Tyler looked up, not recognizing the danger in Jake's voice. I said the military uses child soldiers. It's wrong to send kids to war. I was 14 when I enlisted, Jake said calmly. Are you calling me a victim? Well, yeah. You were manipulated by a system that... Jake's hand shot out and grabbed Tyler's shirt, pulling him to his feet. The cafeteria went quiet as other students turned to watch. Let me tell you about victims, Jake said, his voice deadly quiet. Victims are the families on Titan Colony who got butchered by Zephyrian raiders while people like you held peace rallies. Victims are the transport pilots who died getting those families to safety. I wasn't a victim. I was a soldier. Tyler tried to pull away, but Jake's grip was iron. You're crazy, man. Let go of me. You want to know what crazy looks like? Crazy is watching your friends die while people back home argue about whether the war is worth fighting. Crazy is coming home to find out that people think you're either a hero or a victim, but never just a person who did what needed to be done. Two teachers rushed over and separated them. Jake released Tyler and stepped back, his hands shaking with rage. Principal Martha Davis arrived and escorted Jake to her office. I'm going to have to suspend you, she said. Physical confrontation is not acceptable, regardless of the circumstances. Jake sat in the chair across from her desk and said nothing. What was the point of explaining? She would never understand. That evening, Amy came to visit. She found Jake sitting on his front porch, staring at the street. The November air was cold, but he did not seem to notice. I heard what happened, she said, sitting down beside him. Are you here to tell me I was wrong? No, I'm here because I think you're hurting. Jake looked at her. In the dim porch light, her face was serious and kind. She was the only person who had never tried to make him into something he was not. I don't know how to be around them, he said. My family, the kids at school, everyone. They want me to be normal, but I don't remember how. Maybe normal is overrated, Amy said. Maybe what you are is something different. Something needed. They sat in silence for a while, watching cars drive by. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the cost of their safety. Do you think I'm broken? Jake asked. Amy considered the question carefully. I think you're changed. There's a difference. Jake's phone buzzed. It was a text from his former commanding officer, Captain Lisa Bennett. She was checking on him, as she did with all her former soldiers. Jake had not responded to her previous messages. How are you adjusting? The text read. Jake typed back. It's harder than combat. Her response came quickly. I know. Ryan Peters and Alex Murphy have requested to return to active duty. They can't handle civilian life either. Jake stared at the message. Ryan was 19, Alex was 20. Both had been good soldiers, but they could not find their place in a world that did not understand them. "What about you?" Captain Bennett asked. "Are you thinking about re-enlisting?" Jake looked at the question for a long time. Part of him wanted to say yes. In the military, he had known who he was and what he was supposed to do. Here, he felt lost and angry and alone, but he thought about Amy sitting beside him, not trying to fix him or change him. He thought about Dr. Cole, who understood that coming home was its own kind of battle. He thought about his family, who loved him even when they did not understand him. "Not yet," he typed back. "Still figuring things out. Take your time," she replied. "But remember, there are different ways to serve. You don't have to be in uniform to make a difference." Jake put his phone away and looked at Amy. "What if I can't figure it out? What if I never fit in anywhere? Then maybe you create your own place," she said. "Maybe you find other people who don't fit either, and you help each other." Jake thought about that. He had spent so long trying to become normal that he had never considered that normal might not be the goal. Maybe the goal was to find a way to use what he had learned, even if it made other people uncomfortable. "I scared Tyler today," he said. "Good." Tyler needed to be scared. He needed to understand that his opinions have consequences for real people. Jake looked at her with surprise. "You think I was right to grab him? I think you were right to make him face reality. Maybe you could have done it differently, but someone needed to tell him that his protest signs don't protect anyone." 4. The first time in weeks, Jake felt understood. Amy did not want him to be normal. She wanted him to be himself, even if that self was harder and sharper than other people expected. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now," he said. "You'll figure it out. And when you do, it'll be something only you can do, because you're the only one who's been where you've been." Jake nodded, feeling something shift inside him. The anger was still there, but it felt less like a burden and more like fuel. He was different, yes, broken, maybe, but perhaps that was exactly what the world needed. 3 months after his fight with Tyler, Jake found himself standing in the hallway of Cedar Falls Veterans Hospital. The smell of disinfectant and the sound of wheelchairs rolling on linoleum floors reminded him of the medical bay on the warship, where he had spent 2 weeks recovering from shrapnel wounds. His mother, Helen, had suggested volunteering here, not because she thought it would fix him, but because she finally understood that Jake needed to be around people who shared his experiences. The hospital served veterans from conflicts going back 50 years. Jake pushed open the door to the recreation room. Inside, older men played cards and watched television. Some were missing limbs. Others sat quietly, staring at nothing. A few looked up when he entered. "You the new volunteer?" asked a man with gray hair and a prosthetic leg. His name tag read Frank Turner, Korea Campaign, Asteroid Belt. "Yes, sir," Jake replied. "Jake Morrison." Frank looked him up and down. "You're young. What conflict?" "Zephyrian War, Outer Rim sectors." Frank nodded slowly. "How old were you when you enlisted?" 14. The room went quiet. Even among veterans, child soldiers were rare. Frank studied Jake's face, seeing something familiar in his eyes. "That's rough, kid. Come on, I'll show you around." Frank introduced Jake to the other veterans. There was Paul Chun from the Europa conflict, Maria Santos from the Titan Rebellion, and Bill Davis, who had fought pirates in the Belt. Each had their own stories of loss and survival. "The thing about young soldiers," Frank said as they walked through the hospital, "is that you miss out on learning how to be a regular person first. The rest of us had time to figure out who we were before the military changed us. You got changed before you knew who you were supposed to be." Jake had never thought about it that way. He had gone straight from childhood to war without any steps in between. "Does it get easier?" Jake asked. "It gets different," Frank said. "You learn to carry it better." And you learn that there are others carrying the same weight. Jake started volunteering at the hospital 3 days a week. He helped veterans with physical therapy, played cards with those who were lonely, and listened to stories from men and women who understood what it meant to see too much too young. One day, a new patient arrived. His name was David Clark, and he was 22 years old. He had lost his right arm in the final battle of the HFY War, just 2 weeks before Jake came home. David was angry and bitter, refusing to talk to anyone. "He reminds me of someone," Frank said, watching David sit alone in the corner. Jake approached David carefully. "Mind if I sit down?" "Free country," David muttered. Jake sat in silence for a few minutes before speaking. "I was at Kepler Station when the war ended. Where were you?" David looked up with surprise. "Proxima Base, artillery unit." "That was a tough fight. Lost a lot of good people there." David's anger softened slightly. "You were really at Kepler?" "How old are you?" 17 now. I enlisted at 14. David stared at him. "Jesus, you were just a kid. So were you." 22 isn't old, no matter what the recruitment posters say. They talked for an hour. David had been struggling with the same issues as Jake, feeling disconnected from civilian life, unable to relate to people who had not seen combat, angry at a world that wanted to treat him like either a hero or a victim. "At least you have both your arms," David said, looking at his prosthetic. "I've got scars you can't see," Jake replied. "We all come home damaged in different ways." Working with David and the other veterans gave Jake a sense of purpose he had not felt since leaving the military. He was helping people who understood his experience. He was useful again. At school, things slowly improved. Amy had organized a support group for students with family members in the military. Jake joined reluctantly, but found that listening to their second-hand experiences helped him understand the gap between soldiers and civilians. One girl, Susan Wright, talked about her older brother who had served on a supply ship during the war. "He came back different," she said, "quieter. Like he was always thinking about something else." "He probably was," Jake said. "When you're in combat, part of your mind is always on alert. It takes time to turn that off." "Does it ever turn off completely?" Susan asked. Jake thought about it. "I don't think so, but you learn to live with it." His relationship with his family also began to heal. His parents stopped trying to make him into the boy who had left 3 years ago. Instead, they started accepting the man who had returned. Katie asked him real questions about the war, not the sanitized version she had imagined. "Were you scared?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch. "Every day," Jake admitted. "But fear can keep you alive if you don't let it control you." "Do you regret going?" Jake considered the question. He regretted the loss of his childhood. He regretted the friends who did not come home. He regretted the nightmares and the difficulty connecting with people his own age. "I regret that it was necessary," he said finally, "but I don't regret doing my part." Amy had become more than a friend. She was someone who accepted all parts of him, the damaged parts and the strong parts. When they went to the movies, she did not mind that he chose seats near the exit. When fireworks went off during a football game, she held his hand until the sound stopped triggering memories. "What do you want to do after graduation?" she asked one day. Jake had been thinking about that question for weeks. College felt pointless. Most careers seemed meaningless after what he had experienced. But his work at the hospital had shown him a possible path. "I want to help other veterans," he said. "Maybe become a counselor or work for the VA. There are a lot of people coming home who don't know how to fit in." "That makes sense. You've been there." Dr. Cole had been encouraging Jake to think about his future too. "You have insights that could help other young veterans," he said during one of their sessions. "Your experience, as difficult as it's been, gives you something valuable to offer." Jake had started writing about his experiences, not for therapy, but as a record. He wrote about Carlos and Marcus and all the others who had not made it home. He wrote about the moral complexity of war and the difficulty of coming back to a world that did not understand the cost of its safety. One of his essays caught the attention of a journalist who was writing about child soldiers in the Zephyrian War. She asked to interview Jake for her article. "Why did you decide to speak publicly about this?" she asked. "Because there are other kids coming home who feel as lost as I did," Jake said. "If my story helps one of them feel less alone, then it's worth telling." The article was published in a major magazine. Jake received letters from other young veterans and from families trying to understand their children who had come home changed. Some asked for advice. Others just wanted to share their own stories. Jake realized that his experiences, as painful as they were, had given him something unique to offer. He could bridge the gap between the military and civilian worlds. He could help other veterans find their place in a society that did not always understand them. At graduation, Jake walked across the stage to receive his diploma. His family cheered from the audience, but Jake's thoughts were on the future. He had been accepted to a college with a strong veterans counseling program. Amy would be attending the same school, studying journalism. "What do you think Carlos would say if he could see you now?" Amy asked as they left the ceremony. Jake smiled, the first genuine smile his family had seen since he came home. He'd probably say, "It's about time I figured out what I wanted to do with my life." That night, Jake stood in his backyard and looked up at the stars. For the first time since coming home, he saw them not as reminders of loss, but as symbols of possibility. He had found his mission again. Not in space, fighting aliens, but here on Earth, helping his fellow soldiers find their way home. The war had ended, but Jake's service had not. It had simply taken a new form. He was still protecting people, just in a different way. And for the first time since stepping off that transport ship, Jake Morrison felt like he was exactly where he belonged.